Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Yang Berusaha, Dr. Tricia Yeo, Chief Executive Officer of Ideas Malaysia, esteemed speakers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Salam Sejahtera and good morning. On behalf of Ideas Malaysia, welcome to the report launch and public forum, Asserting Climate Change Leadership in ASEAN, Carbon Pricing for the Malaysian Steel Industry. On behalf of Ideas Malaysia, we would like to thank and express our gratitude to our partner, Malaysia Steelworks Berhad, for their support towards the report. Without further ado, to begin today's proceedings, may I please have the pleasure of inviting Dr. Tricia Yeo, Chief Executive Officer of Ideas Malaysia, for the welcoming remarks.
A very good morning, ladies and gentlemen, friends, members of the media, delegates from various commissions, the EU, and so on, and think tank friends, researchers as well. Welcome to our report launch and public forum titled Asserting Climate Change Leadership in ASEAN, Carbon Pricing for the Malaysian Steel Industry. So for those of you who have not yet been to an Ideas event, which by now should be a very bad thing, no, just kidding, but for Ideas, we run these sorts of conferences, policy forums, roundtable discussions, closed doors. Some of them are open to the public, as is today's. And we regularly like to comment on developments with regards to the most pressing matters in Malaysia, public policy, including the economy, democratic and institutional reform issues and the like. So today's forum, we're talking about climate change. I'd like to thank, firstly, the research team that has worked really hard to put this paper together in a relatively short period of time. You will see them on stage later, but first I'd like to thank Associate Professor Dr. Renato Lima de Oliveira. He's our Senior Fellow and also Associate Professor of Business and Society of Asia School of Business, Malaysia. Dr. Peter Steck, he's a postdoctoral researcher from ASB Malaysia at the Center for Technology, Strategy and Sustainability. Raymond Pang, that's our research team. And this paper essentially examines the steel industry in Malaysia's shift to a low-carbon economy. It highlights the importance of aligning industrial and environmental policies to meet the nation's greenhouse gas emission reduction goals. I also like to thank our research supporter, Malaysia Steelworks, or MaSteel. They have been involved in setting the terms of reference for this research. However, as always, Ideas and our research team will publish our research results independently from any funding support, and this is consistent across the board. So friends, it's interesting. Today we're talking about climate change, and just across the hall, if any of you noticed, Petronas is also organizing another decarbonization forum. And I think not just these two events, but across, the Klang Valley, there are events titled on ESG, on sustainability. So obviously, this is the trend that Malaysia is facing, the world is facing, and it's not going to roll back. So it is time for us to really address climate change. And we know that the time has never been more pressing. According to MIT, we emit over 35 billion tons of carbon every year into the atmosphere. This has caused our planet to be 1.1 Celsius hotter since 1850. And scientists project this increasing to 1.5 Celsius in the next few decades. If the temperature in Malaysia is anything to go by the last couple of weeks, we know that the temperature is warmer, at least in the Kuala Lumpur city itself. But 1.5 Celsius is the estimated upper limit highlighted in the Paris Agreement. And if it persists, we face higher risks of extreme heat, rising sea levels, challenges on food production, and access to clean water. In ASEAN, in the region alone, carbon emissions have been increasing by an average of 3% annually, surpassing the global average of 1% in 2022. Despite aspirations for decarbonization, most ASEAN member states aim for net zero emissions by 2050. However, current policies and nationally determined contributions targets suggest a potential rise in emissions in the coming decades for ASEAN. How about Malaysia? And I apologize for not welcoming earlier in Sheikh Ahmad Farid. Very glad to have you with us, our Deputy Undersecretary in the Climate Change Division in the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environmental Sustainability of Malaysia. Malaysia has made various commitments. We are committed to global climate action through the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or UNFCCC, which aims to stabilize greenhouse gas concentrations. We formally adopted the Paris Agreement in 2016, and in 2021, Malaysia revised its NDC, pledging to reduce GHG emissions intensity by 45% by 2030 compared to 2005 levels. We also committed through the 12th Malaysia Plan, carbon neutrality target of 2050, and we've outlined policies for low carbon development in the NETR, the National Energy Transition Roadmap, and NIMP, the New Industrial Master Plan 2030. So all of this has set us in the right direction. However, these documents also, unfortunately, lack specifics on reducing emissions on a policy level. That's one of the reasons we're here today. Is essential to realign industrial and environmental policies to help Malaysia achieve net zero emissions. But today we're talking about a very specific industry. We're talking about the steel industry. So the recent COP28 highlighted the importance of steel decarbonization. There's the launching of something called the Steel Standards Principles, which outline emissions measurement methodologies that act as a catalyst for the transition to near zero. The steel industry is crucial. You need it in construction, and it's not an industry that will very quickly or naturally go away. But we also know it's a major carbon emitter. 91% or more of the direct emissions from the sector must be reduced by 2050, according to the 2015 Paris Agreement. Now, how about Malaysia? Malaysia's steel production capacity is roughly 16.1 million tons, the third largest producer of steel just behind Vietnam and Indonesia. Our exports of steel in 2023 reached a soaring $5.91 billion and is estimated to increase further with the influx of investments from the region. The demand for steel in Malaysia is also estimated to rise by 4.8% next year in 2024. This year. In 2020, the steel industry contributed to 4.5% of GHG emissions in Malaysia. And as new large-scale blast furnace steel mills become operational, emissions from steel production could increase to 12% of national emissions by 2030 and 57% of Malaysia's manufacturing emissions. This growth contrasts with the regional efforts to reduce emissions. You will also see in the presentation later why the steel sector is something that we would like to look closely at in terms of emissions and how this actually puts Malaysia in a good place to provide regional leadership. So to mitigate the effects of carbon emissions, carbon pricing is one such solution. This is something that has been talked about, but again, no concrete measures yet. This mechanism can provide economic incentives for businesses to reduce their carbon footprint by internalizing the cost of GHG emissions, which will then encourage demand for cleaner technology investments. Our neighboring countries, Singapore and Indonesia, have already started implementing carbon pricing mechanisms. In Singapore, carbon prices started at $5 and were raised to $25 this year. And next year, they will be further increased to $45. And finally, the goal is to set prices between $50 to $80 by 2030. Other neighbors, Brunei, Thailand, and Vietnam, are also expected to set carbon pricing mechanisms by 2028. Given that so many of our neighboring countries are already taking this leap towards reducing carbon emissions, we at IDEAS and the research team, and I hope all of you in the hall today, will also agree that it is urgent for Malaysia to follow suit, but also to provide new regional leadership to intensify our efforts in combating climate change by implementing carbon pricing mechanisms. Today's panel discussion will explore the path towards a sustainable future for the sector with a tone for reduced emissions in the future. We hope that actionable plans can be curated in the near future to ease the transition towards carbon pricing mechanisms, starting off with the steel industry. Apart from Dr. Renato, Dr. Peter, and Encik Ahmad Farid, we also have Professor Ong Kian Ming, Director of the PPE program, Philosophy, Politics, and Economics from Taylor's University, who sits on a committee that he will share with you about. And this committee essentially will have some insights as to what the government intends to do specific to the steel industry moving forward. And members of the audience, all of you come from various sectors, academia, industry. We are eager to hear your thoughts and experiences as we engage in meaningful dialogue. We look forward to working together for a brighter, greener future for Malaysia's steel industry, and hopefully use this as a start for other industries in the future. I think there's some experience in the room as to how things started in other regions. We start small, and we use this as a base to hopefully, not infect is not a good word because that's negative, but we hope to influence and provide leadership for yet other sectors and industries in the country. I would like to thank our team at IDEAS, the research team, Dr. Juwita Mohammed, who's not here today, the advocacy and event team, researchers who have worked hard in facilitating the preparation of this report and today's event. The report is actually already circulated on your tables, if I'm not wrong. Yes, they are. So to conclude, ladies and gentlemen, we believe that addressing GHG emissions in Malaysia's steel industry demands proactive measures. Without intervention, emissions growth jeopardizes Malaysia's climate commitments and transition to a low-carbon economy. Taking decisive action can position us as a leader in ensuring a greener steel industry, setting a precedent for sustainable development and inspiring regional efforts to combat climate change. It is truly important to utilize this opportunity and this moment in time, the fact that there's so much interest in the country, to realign our industrial trajectory with global sustainability goals. Thank you so much for joining us on this lovely morning, and we look forward to the presentation on the report by Dr. Renato and engaging in insightful discussions ahead. Please also be ready to engage with the speakers and ask your questions. We hope that today's discussion will be a lively one. Please bring your thoughts to the microphones as we proceed with the event. Thank you so much to the team, and I wish you all a fruitful discussion ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Trisha, for the welcoming remarks. Now we would like to invite Associate Professor Dr. Renato Lima de Oliveira, Associate Professor 1 of Business and Society at the Asia School of Business, ASB Malaysia, for the introduction to report on asserting climate change leadership in ASEAN, carbon pricing for the Malaysian steel industry.
Hello, good morning. Thank you so much, Trisha. Thank you so much, the whole team of IDEAS. Also to my fantastic research colleagues, Dr. Peter, your work has been incredibly invaluable, and also Raymond Fang, one of the most talented young researchers and managers that we've had the pleasure, or myself had the pleasure of teaching him in our program at Asia School of Business, one of the best MBAs in the world. It's also a great pleasure to be joined today by Enchik Ahmad, which I had the pleasure of meeting recently at Hari Raya Open House. And at that occasion, I had already praised his batik, and now I have another occasion to praise another great batik as well. And Professor Ong Kian Ming, which I know for years, and it's a great honor to be sharing this panel with you, Professor Ong Kian Ming, and thank you also as well, Sharmila, and everyone who came today, Tuesday morning, to hear about steel in greenhouse gas emissions, carbon pricing, or what we can do. Why should we be concentrate on that topic? So I have about 10 minutes, which I want to set the scene for why is that a very important topic, why it kind of caught our attention. I do research about net zero commitments on different pathways to a decarbonized world, mostly on the energy sector. But one critical sector for the world to achieve its low carbon development goals is on the hard-to-abate sectors. It's pretty much easier nowadays to shift our energy patterns of generation towards low-carbon solutions like solar PV, offshore wind, or onshore wind. But certain segments of the industry, such as cement, such as steel, or aviation, they are so-called hard-to-abate sectors where we do not have, in some cases, all the technology required, or they are still cost prohibitive. More and more, the world is looking at putting the right incentives to make sure you don't get locked into high emissions types of technologies. So that is something that caught our attention when we were studying this topic. I was told to. Okay, I would have to put the on first. So, really briefly, we are going to follow a background, key findings, and policy suggestions. Let me start by saying that the steel industry is very important. It's one of the commanding heights of any nation in the development of a steel industry. Is kind of has been traditionally equated to overall development. So what we have as a background, that steel is a significant source of emissions. Thank you so much. Is a significant source of emissions globally, about 80%. Malaysia is actually lower than, or had at least in 2020, a year that many of us prefer to forget, not only because of Ong Kian Ming had left the government, but but because it was a very traumatic year of the COVID, and then GDP overall in the world went down. But by that year, Malaysia was about 4.5% of greenhouse gas emissions coming from the steel industry. But by 2030, it's projected to be 12%. So it means that we are moving from being lower than average of emissions in the world to be higher than average. Why? Because capacity is growing fast. It's growing rapidly in a particular technology, blast furnace, oxygen blast furnace, that it's counter to global decarbonization trends because it's a technology that it's actually the most intensive in terms of emissions. In order to deal with that more immediate, seeing that as a trend, we have seen that the government has imposed a moratorium on new steel capacity, but it's yet to devise a full comprehensive emissions policy. And what we are doing here is really to put forward suggestions for that public debate and why to tackle that sector first. Carbon pricing has been recognized as one of the tools towards decarbonizing the world. It's not the only tool. There are like different criticisms, particularly related to the exact pricing of it, but it's certainly one of the most effective price mechanisms to drive changes of investments, to drive investments into lower carbon solutions. So that's one favored by economists in order to deal with the challenge of climate change and reducing emissions. So some of the findings, and you all have the report in your table, also with lots of academic references. So we really want you all to engage with that material and hopefully also send message to us. We would love to keep that discussion going. In the case of Malaysia, we have seen the rapid growth of blast furnace, high emission type of capacity. And in the report, we go more in detail about the multiple ways that you can manufacture tons of steel. You can do it through a blast furnace, getting raw iron ore and coal. You can also melt scrap, and you have emerging technologies that use hydrogen, the so-called green steel, in order to manufacture steel. That's something that we will need a lot. As the world grows, needs more infrastructure, needs buildings and so on, we will continuously need steel. So the key thing is about how do we manufacture it in a way that is compatible with Paris agreements, with our low carbon commitments. Also, despite this growth of capacity, yet Malaysia suffers from overcapacity, low utilization rates compared to global average. This is an industry that actually suffers cyclically from overcapacity, and many times it drives government's response in terms of protection, anti-dumping laws, and extra tariffs as well. Also, we document in the report that Malaysia shifted from being a net steel importer to an exporter. But in terms of ringgit value, most of our exports are of lower value-added products. And by the way, I've been in Malaysia for 7 years, 5 governments, and 3 agongs. So I do say we, because I really feel as deeply connected to the country and also part of the aspiration towards low carbon development and to be one of the most thriving nations of the world. So let me give a couple of figures that they really showcase how the changes in the trends of the country. So here we have the emissions from steel production in Malaysia. Let me see if I can. In what we see is that the gigatons of CO2 equivalent emissions, they rapidly increase in their projections for 2030 is to have an absolute growth that is quite high, right? So the structural change of the economy has been the following. You have new capacity coming from blast furnace production, which emits more than double than the emissions that you have with other technologies, where you melt scrap. And you have more capacity in technology that emits more. And what it means is that the national carbon budget, the amount of emissions that Malaysia can commit itself to emit in the years to come, then ends up being consumed by a single industry. So it runs the risk of reducing our developmental opportunities from other sectors, because one single sector then becomes a significant emitter. So that is going to be a picture of the absolute emissions. When we compare in terms of tons of CO2 equivalent emissions per ton of steel produced, manufactured, this is also quite shocking that before Malaysia had a much lower than the world average amount of emissions per ton produced. And now, already in 2024, per the latest projections, given the capacity coming online, a ton of steel, on average, a ton of steel manufactured in Malaysia will have more emissions associated with it rather than an average from the rest of the world. So that is something to think about it. Why change it so much, change it so fast, in a way that goes counter to the decarbonization aspirations of the country in different policy documents, but also the pressure from importers, from trade partners, and from consumers as well, in terms of building a world that develops it without high emissions. So then we go into our recommendations, and I'm sure we will have a lively debate during the panel. So how to change that dynamic? It's quite hard to change it in the short term, because these are assets with a long useful life. But we can provide different policy signals, price signals, to compensate and try to mitigate this trend. So one suggestion here is to implement a temporary coking coal tax already in 2025 while preparing a carbon pricing infrastructure. So carbon pricing comes into different flavors, so to speak. You can adopt a carbon tax, just as Singapore has adopted. It comes with certain benefits, the predictability of that tax, but it's also something that has faced numerous political opposition in the rest of the world. Another option of putting a price on carbon is creating what's so-called a cap and trade, where you establish the total amount of emissions, and then you let the market, you create a market by letting different actors of the economy to trade among themselves. So it provides also some incentives. It tends to be less politically, it's more politically resilient than a carbon tax. But it comes with a challenge, which is the fluctuation of prices. So there are also hybrid regimes, which we explain in the report, and also with the citations to different academic material about it. So to establish carbon pricing, it requires a lot of details, a lot of studies, a lot of capability building across the civil sector, across the different industries of the country. So it cannot be done overnight, but it should be studied and implemented as fast as possible, in our view. If the goal is to align incentives towards decarbonization, putting together carbon pricing frameworks is one of the key tools to achieve that. As a roadmap, we suggest to require emissions measurement and reporting for the steel sector and imports in 2026. Again, why the steel industry? Because that's one that is having this trend that is contrary to the rest of the world, and also because it's one of the easiest to measure. It has emissions that are very concentrated. So you can get a lot of efficiencies in terms of targeting the high emitters first when you adopt a carbon pricing. We also suggest then to impose a carbon price in 2027 and couple that with CBAM, carbon border adjustment mechanisms. By that time, if we have a fully operational carbon pricing, then this emergency measure of taxing coking coal then could be lifted. And then the price of the emissions would be based on trades between the different market actors. What is CBAM? What is a carbon border adjustment mechanism? I'm pretty sure that 99% of you might have heard about that already. CBAM is one mechanism to prevent carbon leakages. It is very politically powerful because it aligns the interests of heavy emitters in countries, in different parts of Europe or even in other countries, with also environmentalists. So you don't want to lose certain segments of your domestic industry to countries that they attract investments because they have more lax environmental standards. So how to prevent that? You make sure that whenever a product comes to your market, the cost of the carbon, the price of carbon has been successfully internalized. So that is a very powerful political coalition to say that we are not going to lose investments to countries just because they do not tax carbon. If they don't, whenever we import a product from such country, they will have to be taxed at the border here. It's also very technically complex to implement, and that is something that the world is moving towards building the capabilities to implement it. But the logic is very powerful and very likely to spread. So if Malaysia adopts domestic carbon pricing, it should also consider tying that to a CBAN to make sure that investments of the country are not just leaving to other jurisdictions, maybe even in different places of ASEAN, just because they are more lax in terms of taxing carbon. By the way, we have seen and we document in the report that several ASEAN countries are moving ahead with their own targets of pricing carbon as well. After a pilot scheme to fully integrate and fully have a whole Malaysia market of carbon pricing around 2030. So we believe that this is a feasible timeline. And finally, what do you do with the revenue collected from that? There are different policy suggestions. A key one is to make sure you have revenue recycling. That it doesn't necessarily goes into just improve your fiscal situation, which is an important discussion for Malaysia, by the way, but that you support, essentially, that you support the decarbonization of the country to increase the green competitiveness of the country. So you tax on one side, and then you can return on the other in terms of grants for green investments, for energy efficiency, for attraction of greener technological solutions, including for that sector, green steel made with hydrogen, which is an industry that Malaysia is also looking towards building a future in it. So these are our policy recommendations. So short introduction of the report. And I look forward to the upcoming debate. Thank you so much. So should I leave here?
I think you can maybe go down first. Yeah, Dr. Renato, thanks. Thank you, Dr. Renato, for the introduction to the report. Now to start our panel discussion, I'd like to invite to the stage the moderator, Ms. Sharmila Sundarasagaran, Assistant Manager of Economics and Business Unit at Ideas Malaysia, esteemed panelist, Associate Professor Dr. Renato Lima de Oliveira, Dr. Peter Steck, Mr. Ahmad Farid, and Professor Ong Kian Ming. Ladies and gentlemen, please give them a hand of applause.
Thanks, Shazwan. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Hope everyone is in good spirits on 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. Thank you for being here. So delighted to be here this morning to moderate what I'm sure will be a very lively discussion on carbon pricing policies and also the steel industry. As noted by Shazwan, I'm Sharmila, a researcher with Ideas. Maybe before we start, just to let everyone know that you can bring in your food and drinks as well as we go on with the panel. Maybe I'll start by introducing the panel. First to my left is Dr. Ong, who is currently the director for the PPE program at Taylor's University, and is also on the independent and special committee for Malaysia's iron and steel industry. And then we have Renato, who's the associate professor with the Asia School of Business and also a senior fellow with Ideas. And then we have Peter, who's a postdoctoral researcher with the Center for Technology, Strategy and Sustainability at the Asia School of Business. And also Mr. Ahmad Farid, who is the Deputy Undersecretary from the Climate Change Division of the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environmental Sustainability of Malaysia, the NRES. I want to welcome you all to the panel today and also really appreciate your willingness to be part of the panel today. I think as Tricia mentioned, the topic today is very relevant. It's sort of at the intersection of industrial policy and climate policy, and it has an effect on everyone here directly or indirectly. Maybe just want to talk about a bit about where we are right now. I think it was covered earlier by Tricia as well, and also covered by everyone earlier. There's sort of a terrifying pace of climate change happening, and also an anticipation of how governments will react to this. And also, currently there isn't a robust carbon policy in Malaysia. There are aims to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and the Malaysian government is currently studying the feasibility of a carbon pricing framework. I think that should be coming out next year, I believe. And I think it's important that we continue this discussion, this discourse on this topic. In the report that was launched today, we look at the sectorial perspective, at the steel industry, which is one of the biggest carbon emitters here. I guess to start off, I'll be asking the panel questions, but also we'll be coming back to the audience. I'll be asking questions and opening it up so everyone can ask their own questions and share their thoughts as well. Maybe a question to the entire panel. We've heard from many economists that markets can be part of climate solutions, and also probably heard counter arguments on the sort of barriers of adopting it. What would you say is sort of your thoughts on the use of markets and the desirability of carbon pricing as a mechanism? Maybe you can start with Dr. Ong, and then we'll move down the line.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Shamila. Thanks, Ideas, for inviting me to be a panelist on this very important topic. Can I just check? Any media in the room? Any media? Ada? Okay. Sorry, which media? Just wanted to get a sense. What's that? Okay. No, I mean, I want to be as honest as possible, so that everyone can get free flowing discussion. I'm just cognizant of the aware that my statement shouldn't be taken out of context, so I'll try to modulate them. Okay.
I also think that Ideas later put it on YouTube, right?
Yeah, we will be putting it on
YouTube. Yeah, that's even more important. But I think I still can be relatively frank with my comments. Before I go into the response on the market mechanisms for this, I think I am in a position to be able to say certain things that maybe perhaps Ideas or the ministry may not openly talk about, which is the most important elephant in the room that I need to bring up, is the key reason why you saw the carbon emissions in the iron and steel sector spiking up close to 2020 is because of a large investment from China, Alliance Steel, starting their operations in 2018 in Kuantan. So this investment, I think it's a good investment in terms of giving momentum to the Malaysia-China Kuantan Industrial Park, and also to bring in business to the Kuantan port. In fact, the largest customer to the Kuantan port that's majority owned by IJM would be Alliance Steel, not just in terms of exporting their steel products, but also importing some of the coking coal that was mentioned earlier, right? So that is sort of like the elephant in the room, and whatever sort of like adjustment mechanisms that we have, I think the impact on Alliance and the rest of the industry is something that we cannot ignore. So that's just putting out there. It's not something that I think it's new to those who are in the iron and steel sector, but perhaps for those who are not familiar, that's something that you should be aware of. The second thing I want to say, preface my comments, with regards to the carbon adjustment mechanisms is that, as mentioned by Shamila just now, MITI established an iron and steel committee, an independent iron and steel committee that is chaired by Dato' Omar Siddiq, who is the CEO of HSBC. I'm a member of that committee. we are sort of like halfway through our meetings and different deliberations. And my views today are reflective of some of the conversations that we're having in the committee. Even though, and I have to say this, these are not sort of like the final views of the committee, and we will push for our report at the end of our deliberation process to be issued publicly. So, with those two things in mind, let me try to be a bit more provocative in terms of the market mechanisms. And I know that from a conventional economics perspective, the carbon tax is actually the easiest to implement, and different countries have done so, including Singapore and other countries in Southeast Asia as well, with the eye on the CBAM implementation by the European Union coming in 2026 as part and parcel of that larger ecosystem. I would say that we should consider the cap and trade model a little bit more, simply for this reason. In the cap and trade model, yes, it can be a little bit more complicated to implement compared to a simple carbon tax, and I'll come back to that later. But it is suggested in the context where the playing field is not even. And what do I mean by this? The reason why the playing field is not even is because all the steel players in Malaysia are listed entities that have to pay taxes to the Malaysian government, except for the largest steel player that is not listed and doesn't have to pay tax for 15 years. Right? So the playing field is already not even. Right? And if let's say you impose a carbon tax, yes, some will, the largest producers will get hit more than others. But if you do not impose, if you do not think about a cap and trade, then that kind of uneven playing field will continue. Right? And in the context of cap and trade, this is where it gets a little bit more technical. There is room in which some of the surplus that was enjoyed by a certain player can be shifted to the domestic players in a way that I think is fair and reflective of the fact that all these guys pay taxes and one guy doesn't, right? There have been suggestions to say that maybe we can put the money in a fund of some sort that's overseen by the government to help with the green transition, and I think that was also mentioned for the carbon tax. Tricia would know this well, better than others in this room. If you want to put that into a fund, it will likely be some sort of account amana, because you have to ring fence it for the purposes of the trust account for the purpose of using it for green transition for the steel sector. But first thing, to establish a trust account, you need an act of parliament, and it's very complicated and long-winded. Second thing, once you put that money inside, it's very hard to take out, right? So there's a lot of processes, and by the time you set this up, it may be a bit too late for the steel sector already. So having some sort of a cap and trade where it is relatively easy to shift the surplus from certain parties to others, it'll be much more easier to implement from that regards. So using that kind of market mechanism to address some of the existing unfairness in the playing field. Even if, let's say, you decide to impose the carbon tax, I would again be a bit more provocative and not suggest you do it in a way that is flat. You do a tiered system. Meaning, if you go above a certain amount, you are paying double that. You go above another amount, you're paying triple that. Right? And this means it's very punitive if, let's say, you go above a certain maximum. Right? And then some of that surplus maybe can be considered to be used for a green transition to green steel for the other players. I just want to end with this remark, and this is something that has been reported a little in the press, but not that much, which is the largest player that I talked about just now in Kuantan has plans to expand its operations to the second phase, and this will more than double the capacity of this player from 3.5 million tons to 10 million tons. And the current proposal is to use a blast furnace, which, as the studies have shown and others have shown, and I think Tama Farid would also verify this, the blast furnace is at least 2 times, probably more than twice, more polluting compared to the electric arc furnace. So imagine that spike, and then you double that, or maybe even more than double that, without a carbon mechanism, right? That I think is something that is quite troubling. It is something that we're discussing very rigorously in the independent committee. So, all these market mechanisms needs to take into account these kinds of, discussions, which you have put already in the report. So I'll just stop there for now. Thanks.
Yeah, Dr. Ranto.
Um, Thanks, Professor Ong. Let me add one component there, which is different policies. They have distributive implications in how you're going to design. Then you might want to adapt it to achieve other social goals. So in that case, might be redistribution of income within players. So that goes into the policy design and who is going to be the winners and losers, or how you're going to compensate the losers out of it. That's where politics thrive, in the sense of there's a lot of room for engagement, lots of room to analyze different scenarios and overall consequence of that. But from the idea of using market mechanisms, I'm all in favor of it. You can have top-down regulatory decisions, such as right now the moratorium, but we know that it's not a permanent solution. That something has to come out of it, some decision that goes beyond the moratorium. For environmental regulations, you can also have top-down decisions that say we are going to phase out a specific technology. So after that certain year, you're not going to have that. For example, cars and catalyzers. The direct regulatory option is always something that is part of the tools to decarbonize the world. But it can also come with different compliance costs and different fairness issues and so on. So what a market does is actually to achieve that goal in the most efficient way. In carbon pricing is the idea of put a price on carbon. How do you actually determine that price? Can come through a tax, which is more of an administrative solution, or through the trade of allowances. That's the cap and trade. So as long as you have an incentive to put a price on carbon, then all the players will also have an incentive to seek the most cost-efficient way to reduce their emissions. So some of the existing players, they might be able to achieve more reduction with a lower cost. In others, new investors, they might need to go to that market and then buy those allowances. So it actually creates a very interesting different market dynamics. And it has been implemented in many different countries. The World Bank has a yearly report about the status of the carbon price in the world, which is quite lengthy and interesting. And is certainly a discussion that it has the potential of benefiting Malaysia, and as a deeply integrated global supply chain country, it's definitely something that international investors will care much more going forward.
Okay. It's already on? Wonderful. Thank you very much for those earlier comments. Yeah, I'd just like to add on a few things. The first thing perhaps is the urgency, right? That if you see the projection, and if you were to resume issuing permits for steel production, you would have this rise to at least 12%. Now, that 12% is very long term. The average life of a steel plant is at least 40 years. So if you commission capacity this year, it will not be phased out until 2070, right? If it goes through its normal economic life. Now, there are people saying, well, Malaysia is anyway on the way of implementing some form of carbon pricing. We've been promising it since the 5th Malaysia Plan. Eventually, it will get there. But I think if we wait too long, all this capacity gets in here. And we cannot just switch on carbon pricing. We need a carbon register, right? We need to develop a process to properly measure those emissions for it to be credible. So that's the reason for suggesting a metallurgical coal or a coking coal tax or some kind of stopgap measure, that you at least have an implicit carbon tax, that there is a clear pricing signal to the market, that investing more in large-scale blast furnace capacity is not going to be economically viable. So that's the first thing I wanted to point out about urgency. The second thing is the concept of a carbon budget. You could say, well, so what? The steel industry is 12% of national emissions. That means that, for instance, the guys across the hall at Petronas need to cut faster and more, right? So the carbon budget, we can only spend it once. And someone's going to use it. Should it be large-scale foreign-owned blast furnaces? That's a decision that the politicians need to make. Perhaps that's not the decision to take. The other point about pricing is also that perhaps a fairly small increase in price can already lead to behavioral changes. For instance, we now have in Malaysia idle, relatively clean production capacity with electric arc furnaces, which is not being utilized because it's not economically viable. But perhaps a small shift in pricing can bring that capacity back into use. I'd also like to touch briefly on the inflationary effect, which is often used as a counter argument for any kind of pollution pricing and pollution control. I think the inflationary effect depends very much on how the carbon pricing is implemented, right? There's different ways how you can shift with this and still encourage relatively low-cost production in cleaner facilities. And I think also we need to understand that a small shift in pricing can often encourage producers to use steel more efficiently. For instance, the construction sector is very concerned about steel price increases. But steel price increases is especially a problem for these very high-rise buildings that you see around here, right? They use a lot of steel to do this ultra-high-rise construction. If you're just talking about residential building, housing for the people, then the amount of steel being used is not terribly large. And there might be ways to compensate the price increases in these kinds of situations where there is room. Whereas if somebody wants to build an ultra-high building, well, let them pay more for that building, right? It seems like a fair trade-off. Then, yeah, two more small points I'd want to make. One has to do with the early mover versus the late mover situation in science and technology. If you are too early a mover, it can be very costly to make these changes. At the same time, if you're an extremely late mover, it is also very costly because you can never gain your own capabilities and so on. The risk that we have now is, let's say Singapore has a carbon tax. So in Singapore, it's worthwhile implementing all these emission reducing technologies. Singapore companies are going to benefit, right? They're going to develop them. And sooner or later, Malaysia will take these policies, and then who will sell them the technology? It will come from abroad. Whereas Malaysia is somewhat forward moving in these things, we can develop indigenous capabilities in that. And Malaysia's done that before in areas like semiconductors, petrochemicals, agricultural technology. We create, by having the carbon pricing now, we create the incentives for these companies to develop for these solutions to be commercially viable. The final point I'd like to make is the region, as already pointed out. Yes, Malaysia lives and dies on the international trade, international markets. And we see all around the region that this is happening. Thailand has now introduced its climate bill for consultation. It includes a carbon tax. Vietnam, I believe, sees a carbon pricing coming in 2028. It also likely includes a carbon import tax. We see Korea, for instance, already having an emission trading scheme, but it's constantly adapting it and changing it. So this is an evolutionary process. And I think finally Brunei is implementing carbon pricing in 2025. Usually there's this joke that Brunei is always a little bit behind the rest of ASEAN. Well, if we're not careful, Malaysia will definitely be behind Brunei in this case. And well, that would be a little embarrassing to all the Malaysians in the room. I'd like to leave it there.
Yeah, Mr. Ahmad Farid, would you like to?
All right. Assalamualaikum. Very good morning. Sorry, my voice not so clear because I have a cough. Anyway, thanks Ideas for having me here. On behalf of our Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment Stability, I would like to thank SIDIS and for inviting us here to share our views on the carbon pricing partner. So we already hear a lot about the cap and trade, talking about carbon budget, carbon pricing, whatnot. So I set the context. So we had to what call that? We have to realize that our emission from the steel industry is already at alarming stage. Like in 2017, the emission from steel industry only less than 1 million ton. But in 2019, it's already go up to 7.5 million ton, which is 8 times increase from the previous, that the chart showed from the Prof. Renato just now. So this year we are going to submit our BTR report based on the data up to 2021. It's also worrisome us also because I think there could be another increment, and based on our projection also, we are currently doing our long-term low emission development strategy, LTLS, our pathway toward net zero. We already identified that this steel industry also is one of the industry that could harm us from achieving net zero by 2050. So I believe that this study is very crucial to us actually, because NRES is only doing policy for decarbonization, but the implementation why is live with the respective ministry actually, because like steel industry is under MITI. So if MITI have the bold position that maybe steel industry need to do more on decarbonization, and this is something that we are happy to hear that, and we are glad that under National Industrial Master Plan, so the CCS also has identified to address the issues on this, but I think CCS still quite far from us because the price is so high. But today we are talking about carbon pricings. So let's talk about carbon pricing first here, because currently we also in the midst of study on the feasibility study on carbon pricing. I think I will talk later when come to the more question here. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I'll just segue back to Dr. Ong here. Maybe just to ask a bit on, I think it'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the political economy of carbon pricing. Sort of there's very few places in the world when a carbon tax in particular is proposed, there isn't sort of a political distribution conflict. For example, we see in Australia there was a huge big backlash when it was introduced in 2014. And I think also Renato touched on coalition building as well. So how do you feel like your views on how policy design can be a strategy to sort of build coalitions to support carbon pricing, for example, through rebates or revenue recycling?
Sure. I think Malaysia has a unique opportunity here to try to reduce the political, protests, and also the industry complaints with regards to introducing any carbon mechanism by selecting certain sectors first. And I think the steel sector is one that is worth considering, rather than to have a carbon tax imposed, for different sectors across the economy, which will be, I think, quite unpopular and also inflationary in some respects. If let's say the steel sector and the two main organizations or associations, both both MISIF as well as MSA has indicated that they are willing to have these kinds of carbon mechanisms introduced on the steel sector first, while waiting for a larger sort of like a carbon adjustment mechanism to be rolled out. So why not start with a particular sector like the steel sector? That's one. And if let's say they are willing, then the kind of backlash should be less. Secondly, if let's say the mechanism would be a cap and trade rather than a carbon tax, I think it would be more acceptable to most of the players within this ecosystem. Also want to add, from a policy standpoint, with regards to governance, and this is where the political economy part comes in useful as well. The listed players have an obligation to disclose their track 1 and track 2 plans, scope 1 and scope 2 plans in terms of carbon, in terms of their carbon footprints. The unlisted players, including the largest in Malaysia, they do not have to have any disclosure of this nature, right? So I think one of the ways in which we can also try to up the game for all players to make it into a more level playing field is to say that if, let's say, you are a player that's emitting more than a certain amount, you also should go towards scope 1 and scope 2 reporting as well. And it's probably one of the things that I will push for within the Independent Steel Committee. And I think it would be good for the entire country, because right now there's no, we are sort of like estimating, right, based on production values and all that. But if, let's say, the company itself were to disclose, and this is where the carbon register comes in as well, then I think that company or others, who are not disclosing, will then suddenly think about their carbon emissions. Right now, that kind of realization and awareness, I can say that it's not very high among the unlisted players. Right. So I think this is part and parcel of the ecosystem that is the political economy with regards to the iron and steel sector, where there are many, I think, opportunities for us to introduce some innovations.
Maybe to pivot a bit to Renato, I think it was mentioned earlier that several countries globally and also in the ASEAN region have sort of implemented some form of carbon pricing. For example, with South Korea having their carbon pricing for steel since 2015. Sort of how effective has carbon pricing mechanisms been in this country, in countries in reducing emissions? And also, are there any lessons that we can learn in terms of the implementation?
How effective carbon pricing has been. So in the report, we cite 3 different reviews of carbon pricing, some of the challenges of different mechanisms, different design, and so on. It shows that it has been effective, particularly when you have higher prices, which is like Norway and others. Uruguay also has a super high carbon price. If it's adopted at $1, it's completely not meaningful, right? So some of the criticism of carbon pricing tends to focus on, that's has been insufficient to deal with the climate crisis. Yes, true. Because if you set at a very low cost of enforcement, then you don't send the signal that is strong enough to change the allocation of investments in the economy, to change decisions about, are you going to manufacture with that technology or not? Are you going to shift from using a car to take public transportation, so on and so on? But you see that once it's implemented, then we can discuss the level in the roadmap towards more impactful type of cost, of putting a cost on carbon. So I would say that it's one of the key components of the tool set of policymakers in dealing with the climate crisis. It should not be the only one, but it can be a critical one, particularly as we build capabilities, as we build the different reporting mechanisms, tie that with other goals, societal goals, including investors' goals, such as align your investments with ESG goals, and then have a clear signal about what's that every time that you're manufacturing something that implies emissions, that should be internalized by the players. That how much is internalized, then it becomes, to a certain extent, a political discussion within a society about how much to borne that cost and also what to do with potential future revenues. To sum up that, I also recommend everyone read the report and the references. It has been effective, but it varies a lot according to how much you set that price.
Yeah, I think also there has been a lot of counter arguments on like how the carbon tax has to be really high in order for it to be effective as well. But yeah, I think you've seen some good results from different countries.
So
It's
that's
like
the
many fronts,
issue.
yeah.
But once you actually put together the whole regulatory infrastructure, then we can have a good discussion about what does it mean increasing, like Singapore, what does it mean increasing from that to that, and it creates predictability for the players. It signals that you are capturing investments not only on the basis of total amount of billions of ringgits, but also what it means in terms of green growth, what it's going to be in terms of value added for the economy. Once you take into account that carbon is going to be priced throughout the world, that's the only way that we have in order to deal with the climate crisis.
Yeah, I think even like, sorry.
Sorry, maybe just add one more point. When I said cap and trade, over carbon tax, actually the two are not mutually exclusive. You can start off with cap and trade because it's easier to sell, and then once you have that carbon registry, once people are used to that system of the carbon market, you can then slowly transition to a carbon tax. So it's not mutually exclusive.
Yeah, I think also like I think the idea is to have a framework going and then to have data collection so that you can adjust the prices as you go on as well. Maybe just to get back to Mr. Ahmad Farid, I think earlier we didn't get to hear about your opinion on what do you feel about carbon pricing. Maybe just to add on to that, what are your views on the challenges and opportunities for implementing a carbon pricing framework in Malaysia?
All right, thank you, Shamila, for the question. First, number one, when the government or any country wanted to decide this, it must be with a very high political will. We saw there's one country, Australia. I think there's few years back. I think in 2012 they repealed the law by the previous government on the carbon tax because there are a lot of sentiment that they don't like the carbon tax. And then recently, they introduced the new law where it gives some allowance for the company, like 250 companies, the highest emitters, to reduce the emission. Every year, the company need to reduce about 4.9% of their emission because they have set the target that Australia need to reduce the emission for the NDC at 43%. But based on their trajectory, they only are able to meet 35% without the tax regimes. So because of that, they put that regulation. So just like put some cap for that. But they also can buy some credit as well under the Australia carbon credit units. And then if Malaysia want to be the highly competitive on that also, the government has to really decide on to implement any carbon pricing mechanism, either carbon tax or emission trading scheme. Dr. Ong has put the idea on the cap and trade. Of course, we have some another element. I will talk later. Number two, while other countries like Thailand, Brunei, and other countries also, Brunei of course they have subsidy. Thailand and other countries they don't have subsidies. Malaysia we still have a lot of subsidies. When we wanted to have some sort of carbon pricing in some area, of course, we need to remove the subsidy first. Last year, I think MOF are here. I think they're spending about 81 billion for subsidy. I think for fuel only 28 billion. So they are leaking there. If we got somewhere, we need to cover somewhere. So I think it is not healthy. I think somehow if we want to introduce the carbon pricing, we should remove the subsidy first. Even if we start gradually first, it's good enough. And then the third, of course, on the legal framework. Currently, we don't have any legal framework. If you wanted to have the carbon pricing, you must have a robust legal framework. Currently, the good thing is currently NRES is commencing our study on climate change act. So it's in the process now and should be completed by first quarter next year. If government decided to implement any of the mechanism like emission trading scheme, that is something that when we can put inside the climate change act. It's also subject to the the approval or any green light from the government. And then on the coverage, of course, if you want to do the carbon pricing, we need to get the hard to abate sector, and of course, steel is one of the best candidates actually to be taxed first. Even when we talk to any local industry player, they always come to us and say, hey, please tax us because we cannot afford with this, because we know that they are a threat from the blast furnace plant, that they are emitting highest emission compared to the other plant who use other greener technology. So on top of that, the blast furnace is we can got the culprit for our emission, why it is highest. And then in terms of flash rate also, they also will determine on the effectiveness of the price lah, if you want to do carbon tax. Because Singapore start with 5 and then go to 35 and then 45 and then by 2030 they'll go to $50 to $80. So what are the suitable price for Malaysia also? This is very crucial. That is under the study, this undertaken by the MOF. And then on readiness as well, of course, when you wanted to prepare for the carbon pricing also, you need to get prepared first. I think the proposal also you mentioned, Prof. Renato, you should start by 27, right? If the carbon pricing wanted to be implemented. That means now 24 3 years. So based on the experience from Singapore where they implemented carbon pricing or carbon tax, actually Singapore takes 8 years before they start the carbon tax. And then when they start the carbon tax, so it takes 3 years for them to prepare with the reporting, because first they need to put the threshold. So they wanted to, the threshold is 25,000 ton per factory or per facility if they want to impose. So so after 3 years reporting, already then they decide that the company that achieving the threshold, they're subject to the tax. So if Malaysia wanted to implement such mechanism, so I could see that these are some of the spirit that we need to give more time for readiness and as well as to give preparation to the companies. For the opportunities, the first one, of course, implementation of carbon pricing measures will enhance Malaysia's capacity to develop more robust measurement, reporting and verification on climate-related data information. And we also, as the ministry in charge on the carbon reporting, we will be more happy if there are a lot of preparation also data already in the company at facility levels. Because if we got the data from the facility level, so our reporting will be more accurate, and also we give more comfort to give when prepare the report. One more, when we are now in the Paris Agreement regime, so we need to prepare Bandar Transparency Report, which is the first year report this year. So the report must be very transparent and to show our commitment in reducing climate change. So the data must be very accurate also, and this over will be reviewed by the expert. And then the implementation of carbon pricing also we contribute Malaysia towards product competitiveness at the global level, especially the advanced market such as EU and others. And then the revenue generated from carbon pricing implementation also could fund mitigation adaptation project in Malaysia, like Singapore. For carbon tax revenue, so they use this for their mitigation action. So we also can use this, like if let's say we use ETR carbon tax implemented in Malaysia for this industry, maybe this money generated from this tax also can be used by the steel industry themselves, maybe to upgrade the more greener technologies, so that they are able to use their use back the money actually for their own benefit, not by others, but also to the country as whole. And then the revenue also could support the community industry impacted from the carbon pricing implementation. The revenue also can use for research and innovation, and the revenue also can be given to the state government to implement national-based carbon project and biodiversity conservation project. I think that's all from me at this time. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Peter. You have something to add?
Yeah, can I ask a question? I don't know if it's for Mr. Farid or Ong Kian Ming, because he was in MITI. is there any legal change needed to put a tax on coking coal? Or is that something that in theory the minister can sign onto tomorrow morning? Okay. That's good. Then we made the right assumption in the report.
Yeah. Yeah, so maybe I'll just come to Peter as well. I think the sort of the NETR had outlined aims for Malaysia to develop like CCU hubs, and Malaysia is also being positioned as a potential regional hub for CCUs. Maybe CCUS, how do you view these alternative technological solutions compared to carbon pricing in reducing emissions, particularly for Malaysia's steel industry?
Yeah, I think there's a few, first of all, there's a few misconceptions. If you talk to certain people in the Malaysian steel industry, they figure everything will be fine until 2049. Then we'll buy CCUS equipment and we'll have zero emissions the next year. That's more or less, I'm making it a bit extreme, but it's more or less their thinking, so that CCUS will solve the problem at some point in the future. Now, for blast furnace investors, yeah. So, but that's simply not the case. I mean, the International Energy Agency used to work on that scenario, now says that that is not realistic. And all the zero emissions or extremely low emissions steel projects now have some kind of hydrogen reduction component. So they basically, you close down the blast furnace and you do some electrolysis or hydrogen reduction type installation, and that is the only, what seems to be technologically viable pathway to low carbon steel. So that's to do with emissions in CCUS for the steel industry. The other point to make is that if you want low emissions steel, you need to have low emissions electricity, right? So the Malaysian grid, especially here in West Malaysia, is very high coal component. You cannot possibly make, if you calculate total emissions, close to zero steel, right? Maybe something for Sarawak, which has abundant hydrogen and is really banking on that. Well, a perfect customer for that is a steel mill, right? Because they need lots and lots of it. So that's one point there. The second point about CCUS is if you want to make CCUS economically viable, you're looking at an absolute minimum carbon price of about 200 ringgit per ton. Now, 200 ringgit per ton is now politically unimaginable, right? It completely changes a lot of your, how the Malaysian energy system works, how your emissions planning, etc. works. So if you say CCUS is the solution, you have at least committed yourself to a 200 ringgit a ton carbon price, and perhaps more for certain applications, maybe 500 ringgit per ton. So if you're saying, yes, CCUS the future, that's what you're implying. Now, the final point has to do with Malaysia being a CCUS hub. To be very honest, I don't know enough about this, but I understand that the idea is that we import carbon from, say, Japan and Korea. We re-inject it down into the empty reservoirs we have, and that's all great. Now, I understand that there's no regulatory framework in Malaysia for that. We don't have the framework to monitor, to make 100% sure that the CCUS is actually underground. If the carbon escapes, are you going to charge Petronas 500 ringgit a ton? And are we prepared for their bankruptcy, for instance? So there's a whole issue there if you have this injection and something goes wrong. So I agree that it probably has a solution to play. I think in the hydrocarbon industry, it probably makes more sense, especially it's very concentrated emissions. But I think you need to think very, very carefully about what is the regulatory framework, who's going to issue the guarantees that the stuff is going to be down there for X amount of years, etc. And I don't think we are there yet. It's my opinion.
Maybe Dr. Ong, do you have anything to add to that? Because I know you're on the Independent Committee for Steel. It's sort of like to track the NIMP targets as well. And NIMP does mention CCUS quite a bit.
Yeah, so CCS I think is a good thing to have in the future, and it's good to start developing the technologies, especially in Sarawak where it's more viable. I think for Peninsular Malaysia, the costs are just too prohibitive at this point in time, which has been indicated by the 200 ringgit price that Peter talked about just now. I will also say that there are nuances in terms of this larger discussion. So for example, if there are ways in which you can bring in investments in a sort of like a semi-finished steel product called DRI, which is mentioned in the report, and has been proposed by a company out of Singapore called E-Steel to be produced in Sabah, using initially gas from Petronas, so that the carbon footprint is lower, and then maybe later transitioning to hydro. These DRI products are sort of like products that can be used in the steel production to replace scrap metal, for example. So that can be something that can also form the larger ecosystem to reduce the overall carbon footprint for the steel sector. And this is part and parcel of, I think, what is being discussed within the independent steel committee. So just for your knowledge, Renato talked about a moratorium. MITI came out with a moratorium last year, 2-year moratorium on all new steel and also other non-ferrous investments in Malaysia, aluminium and others. It's also one of the things that is being discussed in the committee in terms of whether we want to lift that moratorium for certain steel products that are not being produced in Malaysia, and including DRI, including flat products, including high-end, long steel for the automotive sector. I think that's still being discussed.
Yeah, maybe I just come to Renato. I think Mr. Ahmad Farid did mention some challenges in terms of the legal standpoint and things like that. What is, in your view, the structural barriers of implementing a carbon pricing mechanism in Malaysia, and also especially looking at the steel industry?
I think it's a good point to pick up one point highlighted by Enchik, Ahmad, on the challenge of we are talking about pricing carbon at the same time that Malaysia spends a lot of money with subsidies, including gasoline subsidies, right? Diesel subsidies and so on. So when we talk about, to give a really, really fast environmental economics 101 class here, when we talked about pricing carbon, the idea is to equate the social costs of emissions to the economic costs of whoever is doing that emission. So there is one cost of running a business if you do not pay for carbon, right? So you might not put the best kind of scrubbers in a power plant. You might not invest in other types of technology because you can just like freely emit carbon. Once you put a price on carbon, and the ideal price would be one that equates to the social cost of it related to the warming of the planet. There's a whole interesting discussion among environmental economists about what would that price be. It's a very high one, but the idea is that we can approximate and get closer to that. And then the individual investment decisions would align with the social cost. So you wouldn't be externalizing that cost to the rest of society. So that's the idea of when we talk about carbon pricing, what we talk about, it's basically to make that the economic players to internalize the cost of their actions, their emissions. When we have subsidies, that is actually doing the opposite. It's favoring an economic activity that is going to rely on more energy-intensive types of activities. So say that you have subsidized electricity, then you don't care about putting the most efficient LEDs for lighting because, yeah, that would only be an incremental gain and I don't have to do it. The government subsidizes that. The same with if you have an option of buying a more fuel-efficient car or maybe even EV car, or a one that consumes a lot of gasoline, but gasoline you can do it so cheaply, then you also don't have that kind of incentive at the individual level. And then you're going to complain that Singaporeans, they fuel their cars in Johor, or the Thai go to Perlis or Kelantan and so on. So all of these, they come together. Are they easy? No, but the rest of the world has been doing. Malaysia is actually quite an outlier in terms of the volume of subsidies. The key thing, and let me just elaborate one point. The key thing in making these politically hard types of decisions, and here we have 2 PhD in political science, but one of us is a politician. But what we understand from the international experience is the key thing is that you have to signal benefits ahead of talking about costs. So what are the benefits of implementing these different mechanisms? Is one, we are talking about new companies, new investments that are aligned with green development. 10 years ago, we didn't have anyone that you might have met that had the title of Chief Sustainability Officer. We didn't have people working as carbon accounting work. The world is changing. There are green professions. I teach this in the context of MBA. We had a series of talks called Leaders in Sustainability. All of these CSOs today, they are trying to find talent to staff their teams. So this is where the economy is growing. You signal those benefits. If Malaysia adopts that, there will be a lot of opportunities of forming new professions here, new talent, investments that are compatible with low carbon development. In knowing that these are the carrots that you are going to have down the map, it makes it easier to take some of the politically challenging decisions, right? Because if you just talk in abstract of, oh, we're going to tax you, nobody wants, and they will mobilize, particularly the sectors that are going to be most affected. But if, as a political leader, you put together a very clear direction and say that this is where we want to go, and these are the benefits of being at that position. I tend to say that I would love for one state of Malaysia to try to champion a policy of being the greener state of Malaysia. Sarawak is doing that to a certain extent, but you could have one state as tiny as Perlis saying that we are going to be the first net zero state of Malaysia, and championing that, and try to attract investments and so on. So that is a healthy green competition among different jurisdictions, and one that a political leader can embrace and then drive society, persuade, be a political entrepreneur of saying that there are benefits of tackling these different things, on introducing carbon pricing, reducing subsidies, at the same time that you support the segments that are most in need of the society.
Yeah, I think it's important that you highlighted that you need to signal benefits to the industry in order to get willingness. There was also a mention about investments, and maybe I'll come back to Dr. Ong. For the steel industry, it's sort of like the other issue where there has been increased foreign investment. I think you mentioned Alliance Steel at the top of the panel. How can Malaysia sort of mitigate the risk of firms relocating productions, especially in blast furnaces, to Malaysia due to weaker regulation? I think you mentioned the moratorium, but how about more long-term strategies?
Yeah, so this is where I think the value propositions that Renato talked about just now are important. It's not just talking about just the carbon adjustment mechanisms, but the value proposition that you want to put on the table to all of the people in the steel sector. In terms of a couple of things. Number one, how do you want to upgrade the sector so that you can produce more products that are currently not being produced in Malaysia, and to integrate them into the existing as well as new supply chains in the automotive, in the E&E sector that's growing in Malaysia. That's one. I think the second thing is, how does this fit into the larger strategy of wanting to take a proactive position, given the fact that you have, CBAM and other carbon adjustment mechanisms that will be implemented in other countries. So, if we don't do it, then others will, and then there will be outflows in terms of the taxes that they will impose. So it's more like a proactive strategy, and this applies to all of the players, including the largest player in Malaysia. And then the third one, I think this one, I credit YB Liu Chin Tong, the Deputy Minister for MITI, who has made these points, I think, in private as well as in public, which is, Alliance Steel, the biggest player, is here in Malaysia to stay. And the best thing would be for the local players to work with them in terms of finding the right ways in which to tackle not just environmental issues, but also other issues such as increasing the supply of scrap in the country, because some of it actually is exported maybe not so without paying the full 15% of the export tax to other countries. Then there are also other steel players in Malaysia that don't have manufacturing license that operate, use it, and sell smaller volumes that also use up, the local scrap local scrap in Malaysia. So how do you then work with these, the local ecosystem? And also, if let's say you have these kinds of mechanisms put in place, right, you can also take proactive ways as an industry to prevent or limit anti-dumping, prevent or limit dumping from other countries, whether it's from China, whether it's from other parts of from Southeast Asia, because of the global overcapacity of steel products, to to play some sort of a coordination role to prevent that dumping from coming into Malaysia. So I think that's part and parcel of the value proposition to grow the entire steel sector together.
Maybe I'll just come back to Mr. Ahmad Farid. I think it would be interesting to see from a policy maker perspective, what are the sort of things that are being considered in implementing something like a carbon pricing? And also, do you think the steel sector should be part of the initial implementation scope, especially since we spoke about how alarming the emissions have been? Just what your thoughts, and also what is being considered to develop this policy in carbon pricing?
All right, thank you. So before I answer your question, just to touch a bit about CCS. So we also involved in the preparing for the CCS framework. So in our part, in NRES, actually we are doing the reporting part, because any carbon being stored in our shore, it should be reported in our inventory as well. Because if they are leaking from the carbon that we store, that will be our emission. That is a bit worrisome to us as well, because if, let's say, the numbers of leaking is high, and then we jeopardize our GHG effort. Actually, we reduce our emission, we bring in the GHG from outside, and it become ours. It defeat the purpose. It's zero sum game. So that means we got the money, but we need to add more money to do more mitigation. And for information also, in the global level, so far the guideline for CCS is not ready yet. Actually, this guideline will be prepared by Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, where the first meeting will be held by the Task Force Bureau of the IPCC this July. So Malaysia have representatives in this bureau. So basically, they will discuss on what are the modalities or what the guideline of the implementing of CCS, because this is very new, and also not much information that still available. So coming back to the question that answer, so basically coming back to what are the consideration in developing the policy, for us when we want to decide what are the best policy. Number one, of course, we need to look our objective for the decarbonization. First, we are party to the UNFCCC. We are signed Paris Agreement. We have obligation. Currently, also, world also is not normal anymore, because the temperature are already at 1.1 degree. Next year, by March 2035, all the parties need to submit the revised new NDC. So we already updated in 2021 to reduce 45% of carbon intensity based to the level. But this year we will commence another exercise to update our NDC to be submitted to UNFCCC and to on our new NDC target. So that's very crucial for us, because we need to have more ambitious target. And then the rule is no backsliding. That means if we are 45%, we need to have more ambitious target, like increases to maybe 50% or 55% based on carbon intensity. Or we need to change it, whether you want to do it based on the absolute reduction. Like some other country, they have based on the absolute reduction. That means if our emission base is in 2005, it become a base. So there's a lot of challenges because our mission in 2005 only about 100 million somethings, but in 2019 our emission already 300 million ton, 330 million ton, but we offset it with our LULUCF, with our forest, our net emission is 150 million ton. So if moving forward, the trajectory is there will be an increment trend. And of course, this is contributed by our generation. We know that our power plant also contributed a lot to our GAG. And then there's another candidate for the high emitter, which is the steel industry. So there's a lot of challenges ahead for this. And now we are doing the energy roadmap toward 2030. This is about to be ready. This will be tabled to the cabinet very soon. And we also coming in with the long-term low emission element strategies to give our direction to net zero by 2050. And this also almost ready, the document. Then this also will be submitted to the government and then to the United Nations after the approval. And coming back to the target. So some of the country they put the target inside the bill, the act, like UK they put that in the climate change act, and some of the country they introduce the carbon budget. So this is something that we need to consider if we wanted to be very serious on addressing climate change. Whether if we address the carbon budget, so we give some allowance to the country, to the company that highest emission, so that we are able to control that. But of course, this will have to have a legal framework as well. And to address the climate, to address the carbon pricing issues, so currently MOF conducting the study under the Partnership for Market Implementation, supported by World Bank, where the study assessed the feasibility of implementing the carbon tax or emission trading scheme. They will study both, either Malaysia want to introduce carbon tax or emission trading scheme, or both, or anyone's in the future. That the study will focus on 4 issues, four segment, which is the first one on impact analysis and policy design. So they will do some sensitivity analysis. Is, let's say, if government introduce the carbon tax at this price, what are the social impact to the people, and then what are the revenue, and then what are the revenue going to use to subsidize people who are the vulnerable to the increment of the price. This is something. And then number 2, they're talking about the MRV and also registered development. And the third one, they're talking about domestic crediting scheme, where if, let's say, government introduce carbon tax or ETS, there will be some offsetting mechanism. Let's say now we already have like a BC Act for VCM. So maybe there are some portion that you could be can be offset by using the carbon market. So I think there's also suggestion in the report, which is actually aligned with some of the policy by others, like EU ETI also have some provision that they can buy from political market to offsetting on all the obligation. And then the 4th on the capacity building and also engagement. Okay, when government decide which pathway you want to use, there will be capacity building. Of course, we do collective in terms of what are the stakeholders involved, like maybe in the for the government sector, and then the private sector, maybe on the NGOs, so industry player. These are some of the effort that have been done. And then in terms of the revenue use also, government also will decide on how to allocate the revenue generated from carbon pricing. Option include investing in clean energy, infrastructure, funding research development or low carbon technologies, supporting vulnerable communities, and also providing dividend of citizens. And then in terms of international contact, as I mentioned earlier, there will be alignment with the target that we already submitted to the UNFCCC. Like if you want to update our NDC, maybe this will be some of the plus point for us, because if we implement carbon pricing, So then we give more comfort for us to be like to have more higher target in terms of addressing the climate change. I think thank you for
Yeah, I think you put out some interesting points. Maybe we would like to open up to the audience first. There are mics at the front if you would like to ask questions, maybe even share your thoughts. You could mention your name and affiliation at the top before you ask your question. I think we will do a couple of questions and then we will revert back to the panel to answer, and then we will go a few more cycles like that. Does anyone have any questions to ask? Yeah, the gentleman over here.
Hi, a very good morning to all analysts and members of the floors. I'm Nicholas from Malaysia Steel Association, MSA. Thank you for having us here. I have 3 points to highlight. The first one will be the both association, majority of the steel producing companies in Malaysia who are members of Malaysia Steel Association, MSA, and MISIF, Malaysia Iron and Steel Industry Federation, are agreeable for the imposition of carbon pricing in Malaysia. This is a very strong commitment by both associations that align with new IMP 2030 and the national agenda of becoming net zero carbon emission. Now, secondly, we would like to propose to have the ETS, emission trading system, which come along with cap and trade for the companies to actually encourage them to further continuing the decarbonization efforts, as of where those that actually put up a lot of decarbonization efforts will earn the credits, via carbon credits, and they will eventually be able to trade and continue to invest and become greener. And thirdly, we would like to appeal to the government to have the funding mechanism so as this will actually push a very strong momentum towards the industry, iron and steel industry, to move forward into the moving up the supply chain into a greener, not just the greener, but also towards the high grade special steel. Thank you very much. And we would like to, it will be great to hear from the government, particularly from MOF, NRES, and MITI about the third point. Thank you very much.
Yeah, is there another question or that you would like to ask? Yeah. Okay, it's okay. Yeah. Yeah, please go ahead.
My name is Ahanta, and I'm here on behalf of the Baha'i International Community for Southeast Asia. And my question is not very specific to the steel industry, but to climate change in general. We know that climate change is a like social crisis that all of humanity is facing currently today. And then when something as major and as urgent really as climate change faces humanity, we tend to place blame. Maybe it's the government that has to do something, or maybe it's major organizations with a lot of means who have to really take measures. But really, when we look at society, we see that there are basically various actors. One of them is the individual himself or herself. Then there are institutions, governments being some of them, research organizations, NGOs, and things like that. But there's also the community, like the collective, the power of the collective that can really make a change. And I'm wondering, when it comes to facing this crisis of climate change, what is the experience? How can we tackle this issue collectively, where individuals, institutions, governments, agencies can come together, and are there spaces for consultation? Are there spaces for collaboration, for really reflecting on the problem that we are collectively facing, and also to come together in unified action to solve this issue? Because it will not go away very easily. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Maybe I'll just get some thoughts from the panel first. I think Mr. Nick from the Steel Association sort of mentioned that there is a unanimous agreement that carbon pricing should be placed in the steel industry, and also on the proposition for ETS system, and also the need for pushing momentum for the greening of the industry. Does maybe anyone have any thoughts on that that they would like to add? Yeah, Mr. Ahmad Farid.
Right, thank you for the question. I think thanks for your support for to implement the ETS and also I mean the carbon pricing for this industry. I think this being discussed in the MOF level actually on the mechanism on whether which mechanism we want to use. Thanks for the input, and also there are secretariat also in MOF here. They will listen. They already listen your suggestion here, and also we bring up this to the committee in the upcoming meeting. I totally agree with you that ETS also something that quite interesting to be implemented in Malaysia compared to carbon tax, because is allow for some flexibilities, and they also can be traded also, and also they also a big flexible when we also offering some offsetting from carbon credit. So if this be materialized in Malaysia, there will be more flexible for the company to implement in Malaysia. And please bear with us that we are in ministry also. We also try to help actually to basically to facilitate for the implementation of the such mechanism. But this is again subject to the agreement from the higher authority, which is the government. Thank you.
Yeah, does anyone else? Yeah, do you have anything?
Let me tackle one point. Thank you so much for your passionate defense of what can I do in order to combat climate change. Climate change is the most challenging coordination problem of the world, because there is an inherent incentive to free ride on the actions of others. So, for example, if you all start to be a vegan, that's great, because you're going to reduce the emission that comes from agriculture. I happen to be originally from Brazil, and I love beef. So it would be like I would love to go and keep consuming beef and have all my friends vegan and helping the planet, right? So that's just one example of coordination problem, that if you do not internalize the cost of your actions, then you have an inherent incentive to let others do it. Another example, if any coal power plant shuts down anywhere in the world, it's good for Malaysia, in the sense that it reduces the overall emissions of the world, and then it will also help Malaysia down the line, future generations. But you are probably not mobilizing that because of a new coal power plant was shut down anywhere else in the world, right? So how do you align those incentives? We are right now getting to more of a global governance to align those incentives. So the CBAN is one example. The Paris Accord is another major example. We still have issues of enforcement. You cannot, that's one of the critical challenges of international relations in general, is that you cannot enforce other countries to do it directly in absence of coercion. But we are seeing the evolution of some of the voluntary mechanisms, others going to be through tax incentives, that you'll start to see this type of alignment, that how Malaysia chooses, for example, to develop its energy industry will impact other players in the sense of how much carbon it takes for a product here to be manufactured. And if people like you, whenever you have a choice of consuming a product and you see a green option and you go for it and you pay a premium, then you are creating an incentive, a voluntary incentive, but that can be meaningful in certain markets, towards producers that they align their products with low carbon development. In our particular case, if we have constructors, developers betting on certification, say we've used green steel, and if consumers are willing to pay a premium for that bragging rights of saying that, oh, our company is headquartered in a building that it's fully complies with the best environmental standards of the world, that helps to drive this change. They are incremental, they are marginal at first, changing the whole society takes time, but those actions, they are when they accumulate, they are meaningful.
Yeah, thank you, Renato. I think because climate issues are such a cross-cutting issue across different regions, there should be spaces for collaboration even between countries as well. We do have some time for further questions. Yeah, Trisha.
Maybe just one comment first. Just one short one on what Nicholas said. Talking about the approach from government, right? If one of the key concerns on the part of MOF is potential backlash or sort of like complaints from the industry. So if let's say you have a case whereby MITI together with the steel associations are supportive of some sort of a carbon adjustment mechanism moving forward, and that is proposed to MOF, I think Tiamat Farid would also know this. It will make it much easier for MOF to accept because there's already the kind of legwork that's done to get buy-in from industry. Yes, there may be some complaints downstream if let's say some of these costs gets passed down, but there are ways in which there can be some mitigation measures. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for the panel and really interesting insights, especially from the ministry. I just want to probe a little bit further on the policy aspect. So again, maybe following up on Peter's question. So one of the key recommendations of our report is to impose this temporary coking coal tax, which I think the belief is that this is something that can be implemented fairly speedily. It's a low-hanging fruit. It's something that I think even the steel sector themselves would be willing to accept. Kian Ming said that a tax is not required for a a law is not required for a coking coal tax. Maybe just to probe further why that is not necessary. Is the Ministry of Finance, the Minister of Finance, like truly able to implement that if we wanted to do that immediately? So that's one. And then the other thing that you mentioned was disclosure. So I think disclosure is a really interesting aspect because at Ideas, we love the idea of transparency and reporting. We've done similar work at the subnational level for budgets, and we find that transparency and reporting does open up and shed light on information that's readily available to the public. So if a reporting mechanism or disclosure requirement is to be made mandatory, which ministry would be responsible to enforce that disclosure? Could that enforcement come from your ministry, Encik Ahmad Farid, from MOF? I mean, or maybe under the CCM, right? The Companies Commission, because they're talking about unlisted companies that would be required to report, to disclose their carbon emissions. So just exploring like from a policy perspective and the actors, the stakeholders involved in this web. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so I think there was like two questions, one on the legality of like implementing a coking tax and also on the disclosure. Does anyone want to take the question?
Just quickly on the coking tax, I'm not 100% sure, but the reason why I say you don't need a law, it's because it's a regulation. So any changes in the tax code, you just change the tax code, and then you update the Gazette. And I think that should not be that difficult a process. You don't need to go and amend a law as far as I can remember. When we, for example, when MITI does any sort of anti-dumping or countervailing duties action, there are temporary tax increases for certain products coming from certain companies, coming from certain countries. As far as I know, those are not. You don't have to go through Parliament. You can just arrange with customs to notify them to have that updated. That's one. On the second issue of compliance, and this is an issue that maybe I haven't brought up before. For the listed companies, that's not an issue because those are the Bursa requirements already. For some of the unlisted companies, there may be. It may be worthwhile to consider on the part of MITI, for example, and maybe MIDA, for let's say Alliance Steel, they want to have a second phase. They want to use new blast furnace to produce other products. instead of giving a manufacturing license that is open-ended, why not consider giving a manufacturing license that are based on, number one, stricter conditions, number two, put a time period on it. This manufacturing license is valid for 3 years, and after 3 years you have to renew. And that's when you try to make sure that these guidelines are being followed, whatever those guidelines may be. It may be additional, reporting from a scope 1, scope 2 perspective. It may be to ensure compliance with regards to certain ESG, promises. It may be also, certain promises with regards to the product mix, which right now, the enforcement or the ability for MITI and MIDA to ensure that certain conditions are met is not very strong, right? So, with changes in this kind of manufacturing license conditions, I think not just for Alliance, but even other players that want to come in, including e-steel for DRI products, this can be part and parcel of the larger compliance ecosystem.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you mentioned about how we need some kind of tracking mechanism with the manufacturing license. I think now we don't have that. Maybe does anyone else have anything else to add on? Otherwise, does anyone have another question?
Hi, my name is Paul Scanlon. I, up until a year ago, for 16 years, I was the global CTO of Huawei. Yeah? I think you know the company, $150 billion. Yeah, would have been 500, but some geopolitics sort of derailed us. Yeah, so because of age, I have to retire. Right, you got no choice. Certain age. So the last couple of years, I've been working with a UK and German company that's owned by a friend of mine. We do AI. We don't do large language models. We don't do GPT. We're not interested in that. But we apply them to something that's very specific, and that's relating to those things relating to sustainability and circularity. Yes. So I've got a whole bunch of different ideas, and I heard about carbon offsetting and things like that. So first couple of questions, and you mentioned about Bursa and the ESG. So I understand Russell ESG and how it works, and the E, and it's all self-reporting. It's a $54 billion industry, and everybody makes money, but nothing happens. So my real question is, are you familiar with, sure you are, ISO 14001 series on sustainability, number 2, the new ISO standard 5920 on circularity, and more importantly, the new EU directive, which will become law in the EU of the 6th of July this year, which mandates that all companies doing business in Europe must comply with a new version of this thing called ESG, which includes sustainability and circularity. And given that you've got about 42,500 manufacturers in Malaysia, you need to worry about how you're going to do business in Europe. So there are a few things that I think are important from government policy, understanding how to do business as part of the supply chain. Because if a European company wants to buy products from Malaysia, you're going to have to demonstrate that compliance. Maybe not immediately, but in the very near future, yes? The second part, if you have a look at things like sustainability and circularity and the indicators that are in there, then there are probably other things you could do. So just taking, I think it's Mr. Ong, your comments on policies and things and licensing, why not mandate that everything must have a carbon capture device? Okay, they exist. They may not be terribly efficient, but it's a factor of the capex, right? The second one is for all energy that's being used by the steel industry, it should all come from renewables, and that means you build it yourself as part of the deal. And the third component is if you've got byproducts like slag, yes, you mentioned some of the governments over, up in the northern part are trying to reuse some of these products and put them into roads, etc. But, the construction industry using cement and concrete, slag is an excellent substitute for it. So you could also offset that against, in very practical things. I'm a practical guy, right? I know how to apply things and get them done. So these are just some suggestions that I have on moving forward in this industry. I don't know anything about steel at all. I haven't been to a blast furnace since I was a boy in Australia, and we closed them down, 40 years ago. But there are some suggestions, yes, carbon capture, solar-based energy, because you've got tons of it here, and reusing the slag, all the slag, and offsetting it with, your friends in Whitehall and the concrete, I think is very, very pragmatic. But more importantly, just to have awareness of sustainability and circularity as it applies. Nobody is compliant yet. And there is AI software available, should you want to buy it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. I think the first question was on the compliance and also the ISO standards. and ESG standards, about how complying with different countries' standards. Does anyone want to take that question? Peter?
I haven't read the specific standards you refer to, but I had a discussion recently with somebody who's at the EU desk for a law firm here, and they mentioned also the very deep impact that the EU supply chain new directives have. Maybe to add to that, there's also a human rights component. So if there is forced labor anywhere in the chain, that could be a problem. Now, it's common practice, or I don't want to get sued, but there is many employers in Malaysia hold passports of workers. And there are reports of practices where they come in on a certain contract, they're first to sign another contract where they make less money. That would probably qualify as a modern slavery concern in the EU, and that person then has standing to sue the company or sue them in an EU court. So just for context, his concern is partly that if these rules are so strict, it becomes more risky to operate in a country like Malaysia. So FDI will move probably closer to home. And if the EU starts with it now, very often EU is the regulation leader. Next is maybe California, or after that Japan. So it could very quickly erode Malaysia's competitiveness in FDI. So I think it's a genuine concern. It's part of a larger conversation. What we often get, if we talk about steel specifically, is that Malaysian steel exports to the EU are still relatively small, and that is true. But I agree with you, as this gets broader, as CBAM gets broader, as these requirements get broader, then Malaysia needs to respond.
Yeah, and I think the second point was more on mandating sort of a greening of the supply chain and renewable energy. Maybe Mr. Amafari, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, I think in the suggestion by report also, I think it's quite interesting also by using REC, right? So REC also is like using the certificate from renewable energy is one of the options that you can use. And in the cement industry, for instance, like clinker, also they will replace it by the more biomass product, just like use fly ash. But steel industry, I think that a lot of opportunity, like you using more greener technology that I think some of the panel already mentioned here. So in terms of the chance to use renewable energy, the Energy Commission also, I think they come up with the green rate, GET, not mistaken, that the company also can subscribe to this. This also depends on the scope 1, scope 2 also. So then they are able to use this. I think you can, I don't want to highlight the company, but there are one company, steel industry, they got the highest mark in the sustainability report. So that could be one of the example that can be followed actually. If any steel industry wanted to embark on the green journey toward that. Thank you from me.
Yeah, if there are no further questions, yeah, sure, go ahead.
Assalamualaikum and good day. Thank you so much for all the panelists for a very refreshing take. My name is Alyssa and I'm from Malaysian Institute of Defence and Security, a think tank part under Ministry of Defence. So my question is quite general, but since we're on the topic about carbon pricing, decarbonization, and I think it ties very well with the concept of just transition, I would like to pose a question where, in regards of the upcoming COP29, there is two big takes which will be on climate financing and just transition. How can these mechanisms will rope in to help Malaysia strategy further aligns? And talking about just transition, I think a lot of the conversation has been very money oriented or like very economic incentive. How about the labor itself? Like how can we incentivize, well, we want to decarbonize, but we are not damaging certain parts of the community that is actually strongly dependent on certain parts of the steel industry? Thank you.
Yeah, so I think the question earlier from Ms. Alisa was on financing and also on the just transition, and also I think on sort of labor issues as well as we transition into decarbonization. I think like who will be left behind and who will be the winners of the process. Does anyone want to take the question?
Thank you for highlighting this, climate finance and also just transition. On climate finance, one of the decisions in COP20 in Dubai was they managed to get some funding for the L&D fund, loss and damage. So this is one of the important milestone that we achieved in Dubai. But for just transition, I think that coming back to the when any journey come from conventional ways toward more low carbon pathway, like for power plant, they close the conventional power plant, then they need to retrain to the new environment. Maybe they wanted to retrain this. So for Malaysia, I think for the human resources, so we actually already invited the Ministry of Human Resources actually to look into this. I think they are also they are following this track actually on this transition, where Malaysia also actually somehow we need to be ready to this, because in near future when most of the industries change from brown industries, for instance, to the more green industries, so a lot of job creation need to be added, and also the old traditional job maybe dissipate. Just like what AI happening now, when some of the or current job they already lost the job because the AI take over. Same with climate change also, when most of the industry like IPPU, I always the IPPU, industrial process product use, because this industry fall under IPPU, including the cement industry and also the steel industry. So when most of the normal traditional work already changed to new era, so that means there are a lot of training and also capacity building are needed to provide this new worker with new challenges and also the new opportunity. So coming back to this, Malaysia will still continue to follow all the negotiation in COP29, and this June we will go to bond session, intersession, to basically to monitor and also to give our intervention on what are our standard point to address on this transition, also the climate finance. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we are reaching towards the end of our panel. It's been a very long panel and also a lively one. Maybe I'll just give the panelists like a few minutes to wrap up their thoughts on the whole topic today. Maybe we can start with Dr. Ong.
Look out for the independent steel committee report for more policy recommendations and clarity. Thanks.
Please read the report, also explore the reference. It was a very interesting joint work that we did. And as the world moves towards decarbonizing different sectors, I could expect that we would have challenges that also tackles different industries that are hard to abate. So understanding some of those challenges and the role of different policy instruments is going to be a critical thing to make sure that Malaysia is going to be well positioned and resilient to face the foreign regulations, but also an evolving consumer preference towards goods that are manufactured and services that are with certain environmental standards. Thank you.
Yeah. I think one point to make, maybe in summing up, is that Malaysia is an upper middle income country. That's bad in a way, because it means its emissions are much higher than many developing countries. Malaysian emissions are per capita higher than that of the UK or Germany, for instance. It's also good because Malaysia has capabilities to make these changes itself. It's bad again because Malaysia doesn't get huge overseas development aid. So Malaysia is a little bit stuck in the middle. And in terms of making policies, it needs to kind of find its own way. It is kind of following, but it has to follow faster than maybe some of the developing countries. So I think realizing that there is no set in stone path for how to do this, but countries are just doing these things. We're talking about CBAM. CBAM is just being implemented. We interviewed people from the European Commission. They're saying, no, we're still figuring it out. We're just checking the documentation and things like that. So realizing that it is a work in progress and that Malaysia has a kind of unique and challenging position basically means that we maybe need to run a little bit harder, think a bit more creatively, but I'm very confident that we can do it.
On behalf of our ministry, actually, we are glad to see that a lot of parties and also organizations are helping us actually to reduce the carbon actually. So we foresee that if the trend and support from industry also, so it make us easier actually because we are doing the reporting. So if the effort from the industry, support from industry, also from the ministry to reduce the carbon from the hard to abate sector especially, so it can help us actually to achieve our target actually in the future, especially to achieve our NDC or our net zero goal in 2050 by at least. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. I think I'd like to thank all the panelists for sharing all their thoughts. It's been a lot of interesting conversation, and it's also interesting to hear from the audience of, especially from the Steel Association, on how they also view the carbon policy framework. So thank you to everyone for sticking around for the couple of hours for this panel, and look forward to seeing you in future events as well. And please do read the report and the research as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharmila, and the panelists. Please remain on stage for a photo session. I also invite Dr. Trisha to be on stage for a quick photo session. Ladies and gentlemen, while waiting for the photo session, please do scan the QR code on the screen for you to download the full report. I know some tables already have the hard copy of the report, but if you don't, you can... could you please put up the QR code again? Okay. All right. Okay. Right. We will put up the QR code right after the photo session. Okay, thank you, panelists. Please take your seat. Ladies and gentlemen, today's event is coming to an end. On behalf of Ideas Malaysia, we would like to express our sincere appreciation and heartfelt gratitude to all contributors and participants in making today's event a success. Before parting ways, on behalf of Ideas Malaysia, we would also like to express our great appreciation to Malaysia Steelworks Berhad for their support toward the report. This event will not be possible without their utmost support.